In the age of war, when mighty generals and fierce warriors raised their banners to claim supremacy over the land, it was the era of the samurai. Among those devoted to the battlefield was one man whose courage knew no bounds. During a fierce encounter, he struck down a monstrous foe, severing its head. To his surprise, the severed head spoke, warning that another monster still lived. The warrior, taken aback, remarked that he had not realized the creature was still alive and jested that it must have suffered. Without hesitation, he dashed forward toward the next monster, declaring that it should prepare itself. For a samurai, there was no retreat. The only reason he continued to fight alongside his comrades was for one purpose: to face death in battle against the mightiest warriors the world had ever known. After that, he prepared himself to face the enemy's general. He announced that he had captured the enemy commander. Upon hearing this, one of the warriors ordered the others to follow the mercenary, and they all began to advance with him. On the other side, the enemy commander commanded his troops not to falter and to engage the approaching force. Soon, both sides clashed, and the battle erupted in full force. In the midst of the chaos, the mercenary shouted for everyone to get out of his way as he cut down the monsters that blocked his path. Without slowing, he rushed toward the enemy commander, leaping through the air in a fierce assault. He declared that his target was none other than the enemy general's head. He lunged to attack, but the general swiftly defended himself and leapt onto his horse. For a brief moment, the two warriors locked eyes, their gazes filled with intensity and aggression. The mercenary taunted the general, remarking that he had managed to deflect his strike. Not bad. The general responded that a mere mercenary dared to challenge him, but admitted he might indeed be worth the fight. Both then charged toward each other, their weapons clashing. The general wielding his javelin with deadly precision, while the mercenary countered with his sword. During the struggle, the mercenary noticed an opening and wondered if the general was using his arm as a shield. Suddenly, the general drew his sword and threatened that the mercenary's head would be his. But before he could strike, the mercenary counterattacked, seized the general's weapon, and swiftly decapitated him. As the lifeless body fell and blood splattered across him, the mercenary muttered that it had been a worthy duel, acknowledging that there were still warriors capable of making him fight seriously. He looked down at his fallen opponent and said his farewell to the unknown warrior. Then, realizing his duty, he decided to retrieve the general's head quickly. Calling out to the others, he asked for someone to give him a hand and muttered in frustration, wondering if the other truly thought mercenaries were nothing more than errand boys. But then, the situation took a sudden turn. The mercenary was unexpectedly attacked by his own allies, who unleashed a rain of arrows upon him. Standing together on one side, they told him that it was nothing personal, but he had to die. His head was worth more than that of the enemy general. Soon after, one of the warriors picked up a box and remarked that 2 heads would make a fine tribute for their lord. Without hesitation, they all began attacking the mercenary. Despite being struck by countless arrows, he continued to move forward with unyielding strength, charging straight toward his betrayers. With fierce determination, he declared that this was exactly why he loved being a mercenary. The warriors kept firing at him, yet he pressed on through the storm of arrows, refusing to fall. His life, like that of any true samurai, had always been defined by battle, and even in his final moments, he had expected nothing less than to die on the battlefield. After that moment, the mercenary suddenly froze as a strange magical power surrounded him. The world around him blurred, and before he could comprehend what was happening, he was consumed by the light and vanished completely. When the scene shifted, he was seen sitting alone, without clothes, in a vast, empty space where nothing else seemed to exist. In confusion, he wondered aloud what this place was, where his enemies had gone, and more importantly, where he himself might be. Then, noticing his reflection, he was shocked to see that his body looked younger. He questioned what was happening, unable to understand the situation. Just then, a beautiful woman appeared and approached him gracefully. She told him that what he was experiencing was her gift, or rather, that she had restored his body to its prime. She introduced herself, saying that she was the goddess who oversaw the circle of reincarnation. However, he seemed too dazed to pay attention, which made her visibly frustrated. She called out to him, demanding that he not ignore someone mid-greeting, reminding him that she was a goddess and deserved at least a little respect. Finally, he asked her if he was dead, adding that if so, there must have been some mistake. The goddess tilted her head and questioned what he meant by that. He explained that his fate after death had been decided long before he was born, and it certainly wasn't supposed to involve standing before a beautiful goddess. The goddess laughed lightly, remarking that he caught on quickly. She then summoned a glowing device before her, examined it for a moment, and informed him that the number of people he had killed was 10, 100, 1,000, far too many to count. She chuckled and commented that under normal circumstances, he would have been sent straight to hell, but he was fortunate because she had summoned him instead. He seemed puzzled and repeated the word, "summoned?" The goddess confirmed it, saying that even if she explained the details, he might not fully understand. She went on to tell him that there were multiple goddesses, each governing their own worlds, and that she too oversaw a beautiful realm. Then, pausing as if struck by a thought, she confessed that a problem had arisen in her world, one that required a strong warrior to solve. That, she said, was why she had chosen him and called him Rokaru. Upon hearing the goddess's offer, Rokaru immediately refused. The goddess, taken aback, responded in confusion, saying she had not even finished explaining. He told her bluntly that her world and its problems did not concern him. However, he added that she had interrupted the very reason he lived for. He stepped closer to her, looked straight into her eyes, and said coldly that if she had been a man, he would have torn her apart and fed her to the bears. The goddess froze in fear, shocked by his words, and even imagined herself crying out for help as if she were about to die. But before she could react further, Rokaru calmly told her to relax, assuring her that he never harmed women or children. Then, he turned away and began to walk off. Desperate to stop him, the goddess called out, asking if he was not interested in strong opponents. She told him that in her world, countless powerful beings existed, warriors unlike any he had ever faced before. Gathering her courage, she continued, explaining that her world was not inhabited by humans alone, but also by beings of monstrous strength and demonic creatures. There were humans who could cleave the earth with their swords, and beasts and monsters that defied all human understanding. Rokaru then asked in irritation what exactly she was talking about, wondering why she hadn't just said that from the start. He questioned her about the problem she needed him to solve. The goddess replied that it was nothing complicated. In her world, monsters were multiplying at an abnormal rate, and she needed someone to stop them. Rokaru confirmed that all she wanted was for him to kill these monsters, remarking that such a task suited him perfectly. He then asked how he was supposed to reach her world. The goddess told him that she would transfer him there herself and instructed him to sit still. He sat down cross-legged on the ground as she began to prepare her magic. Before casting the spell, the goddess paused and decided to warn him. She asked if he was truly certain about this. When he asked what she meant, she explained that once he entered her world, there would be no turning back. She would not be able to assist him in any way. She asked again if he was willing to accept those terms. Rokaru replied confidently that she need not worry, as he had never relied on anyone's help before. He said that in his eyes, the strong survived and the weak perished. That was the only truth that mattered. The goddess then completed her spell and sent him to her world. As the light faded, she quietly prayed for his safety, murmuring that he would surely be fine, for no one was more suited to the task than he. Yet as she reflected on his cold, ruthless eyes, a chilling thought crossed her mind. Had she just unleashed a monster upon her own world? Finally, Rokaru arrived in the goddess's world, standing amidst a vast forest. He looked around and remarked to himself that this was indeed the goddess's domain. Rivers glistened under the sky, mountains loomed in the distance, and the scenery captivated him. As he explored further, he muttered that he liked what he saw. Noticing that he had neither clothes nor weapons, he decided that his first priority should be to find a town. While searching, his senses caught the scent of blood and beasts. Someone must be under attack, he thought, and ran toward the source. Soon, he saw a group of monsters attacking a carriage driver. Shocked, he noticed a dog standing among the scene and remarked with amusement that it was wearing more clothes than he was. He laughed loudly and declared that this was interesting, a two-legend club-wielding dog. At that moment, someone on the carriage called out, urging him to stop laughing and help. Rokurou looked at the person and asked if they were a survivor. Just then, the monsters noticed him and charged. Rokurou readied himself, muttering that these were a bunch of feisty mutts. Without any weapon of his own, he fought fiercely, seizing the monsters' weapons and using them to defeat them with ease. After finishing, he commented that they were weak and that was disappointing. He then approached the man who had been attacked and asked to borrow his clothes. After putting them on, he turned to the person who had been standing on the carriage. She stepped forward, revealing her face, and Rokurou recognized her immediately. He asked if she was the goddess, and she replied that she had been worried about him and had come to find him, expressing relief that she had arrived in time. Rokurou commented that it wasn't perfect, but it would do for now. Liella, seeing him dressed, complimented him warmly, saying that the clothes suited him. He replied that he was heading toward the town and asked if she was coming. She pointed out that he didn't even know the way, prompting him to turn back and look at her. When she asked what, he smiled and said that he liked her world, that it was going to be fun. She watched him for a moment and agreed. Together, they began moving toward the town. Along the way, she introduced herself properly, saying that in this world she went by the name Liella and instructed him not to call her goddess. Rokurou shrugged, commenting that it was just a name. She insisted that it was important. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the dog monster that Rokurou had killed earlier. The creature returned, regenerating and regaining its strength. Now it stood alive once more, brimming with even more energy and appearing far more dangerous than before. Rokurou, a samurai who had devoted his life to the battlefield as a mercenary, had been summoned by a goddess to fight against the rising tide of monstrous creatures. Reincarnated into another world, he now stood at the gates of the royal capital, a bustling place where people, goods, and countless ambitions converged. When they arrived at the entrance, Liella pointed ahead and said that they were finally there. Rokurou observed the towering stone walls and remarked that they looked solid and difficult to breach. Liella quickly warned him not to say such things once they were inside. Just then, 2 guards stopped them, ordering them to raise their hands where they could see them. They said the 2 looked suspicious and would have to come to the guard station. Liella protested in disbelief, asking if she also looked suspicious, and scolded them for daring to point their weapons at a beautiful young woman. Rokurou sighed and quietly wished she wouldn't make such a fuss. At that moment, another man arrived and explained that their duty was to maintain the safety of the royal capital. He said they simply wanted to ask a few questions, unless the 2 of them were hiding something. The man introduced himself as Leon Cartwright, captain of the royal capital garrison. Standing before Rokurou, he studied him closely. Rokurou agreed to answer any questions, but asked that they be quick, as he wanted to see the royal capital right away. Leon nodded and invited him to follow. They were brought to the royal capital's specialized checkpoint, where the questioning began. Leon first apologized for the inconvenience of the inspection. Rokurou interrupted, saying he didn't mind but wanted to know where Liella was. Leon explained that her identification had been verified and she was waiting outside. He added that she appeared to be an apprentice adventurer who had just registered with the guild, while Rokurou himself was not affiliated with it. When he asked about the guild, Rokurou admitted he had no idea what it was, explaining that he had only just met Liella and had come from a distant land. Curious, Leon asked where this faraway place was. Rokurou replied that it was Hinomoto. Leon frowned, saying he had never heard of it, to which Rokurou answered that it was natural. Hinomoto was an isolated, closed-off country. Leon asked for his name and Rokurou simply said, Rokurou. When asked about his purpose in the royal capital, Rokurou explained that he intended to procure weapons and equipment to kill monsters. Leon observed that this sounded like the work of an adventurer, though he noted that mercenary work wasn't very common in such a peaceful region. He asked if Rokurou had been a mercenary in Hinomoto, to which Rokurou replied that he had, adding that in a land of endless wars, it had been good business. Yet inwardly, Rokurou admitted that money wasn't his true motivation. What he truly sought were powerful opponents. Leon said he understood and, despite his reservations, agreed to issue a temporary tourist ID for Rokurou. Rokurou remarked that Leon seemed an understanding man, but Leon reminded him there were conditions attached. He wrote them down and instructed Rokurou to read them carefully, emphasizing that he must report to the Adventurers Guild before the ID expired. Rokaru nodded, saying he understood. Leon handed him the permit and added one final warning, to avoid causing any trouble, as he despised pointless killing. Then he formally welcomed Rokaru to the royal capital. Outside, Liela waited for him, relieved when he appeared. She said she was glad he'd been allowed through and admitted she had worried he might cause trouble. Rokaru asked if she saw him as a mad dog, and she teasingly replied that he was simply a battle maniac. Soon, a man approached them, introducing himself as Keith, the guild master of the Adventurers Guild, the very person who had vouched for them at the garrison. He greeted Rokaru warmly and thanked him for taking care of Liela. Since it was already late, Keith invited him to visit the guild another day. Rokaru agreed and thanked him for the introduction. Together, he and Liela finally entered the capital. Elsewhere, Leon spoke privately with the guild master. "What a man," he remarked. Keith smiled, teasing that the captain sounded somewhat dejected. Leon admitted that Rokaru had acted provocatively, as though testing him. Keith replied that Rokaru had seemed rather polite to him, but Leon shook his head. He said he doubted the man's interest was limited to seeking strong opponents. In his eyes, Rokaru was a bloodthirsty beast and someone worth keeping an eye on. Meanwhile, within the city, Liela suggested that they find a place to stay for the night. As they walked, Rokaru's attention was caught by a coat displayed in a nearby shop. The shopkeeper greeted him warmly, and Rokaru asked if the kimono on display was for sale. The shopkeeper explained that despite placing it prominently, few people showed interest. It was an old, worn piece from the eastern provinces, rare but too valuable to discard. Excited, Rokaru said he would take it and asked for the price. Before he could proceed, Leela reminded him that he didn't have any money. Rokaru shrugged and suggested paying on credit. Leela sighed and told him that such a thing didn't exist there. The shopkeeper told Rokaru that there was no need to pay, saying it was better for him to wear the garment than for it to be thrown away. He added that it would probably look good on him. Rokaru accepted it, put it on, and walked proudly as if he were a king. Liela looked at him, amused, thinking that the sight was almost picturesque. Rokaru commented that he never expected something like this to exist in that world, and wondered aloud if he could find something for his waist as well. Liela asked what he meant, and he replied that he was talking about a katana. When she reminded him that he still didn't have any money, she sighed and thought to herself that he really was like a child. Eventually, they arrived at a weapon shop. Rokaru looked around and remarked that the shop had quite an impressive selection. Liela reminded him again that he couldn't buy anything. The shopkeeper greeted them warmly and asked what kind of goods they were looking for. Rokaru, brimming with confidence, asked if the shop carried any katanas. The shopkeeper looked puzzled and asked what a katana was. Rokaru simply said it was fine and that he would look around for himself. The shopkeeper gave him a disinterested glance and muttered the word plebs under his breath. As Rokaru examined the weapons, he picked up a sword and noted how light it felt, saying it was almost like a toy. Curious, he asked about the patterns engraved on it. Liela explained that they were magic crests, symbols that allowed weapons to channel magical energy, strengthening their attacks or even letting them strike formless creatures. Such weapons, she said, broadened the scope of combat tactics. Rokaru admitted that he didn't fully understand it, but found the concept interesting. He began testing the feel of the sword in his hands, while the shopkeeper whispered to one of the female assistants that the two clearly couldn't afford anything. The assistant asked if she should ask them to leave. The shopkeeper agreed and approached them, apologetically saying that the store might not have what they were looking for. Leela quickly understood the hint, grabbed Rokaru by the sleeve, and agreed, saying they would take their leave. But when she pulled, only his jacket came off. Rokaru was still standing inside the shop. She called out to him in exasperation, but he told her to wait and asked the shopkeeper to prepare for a test cut. He picked up an ordinary sword, and one of the workers scoffed, calling it cheap. Rokaru turned and asked what he'd said, but the man brushed it off. Soon, the shopkeeper brought over a suit of armor and explained that it was general armor used for testing purposes. Rokaru nodded and apologized to Liela, saying he would be finished soon. Liela sat calmly nearby, telling him to take his time and enjoy himself. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper smirked to himself, thinking that the armor was actually their top-grade heavy armor, something a cheap sword like that could never hope to scratch. As Rokaru readied himself, the shopkeeper silently cursed him as a bothersome, penniless customer. Then, with a single swift motion, Rokaru swung the sword. The strike split the armor cleanly in half, base and all. Looking at the weapon, he declared that he had found what he was looking for. The shopkeeper, unaware of what had happened, began laughing and mocked him, saying that such a cheap sword could never cut through anything substantial. He suggested that Rokaru reconsider his budget and return later. Rokaru handed the sword back calmly, saying there was no need, he wouldn't be coming back to this shop. The shopkeeper sneered and replied that they didn't want him back anyway, muttering again about plebs. As the female assistant went to move the armor, she froze in shock. The armor was sliced clean through. She gasped and called the shopkeeper over. Both stared in disbelief, realizing what had just happened. The armor, which should have been impenetrable, had been split perfectly in half. The shopkeeper stood speechless, wondering what kind of man Rokaru truly was. Outside, Liella caught up to him and asked where he was going, suggesting they rest at an inn. Rokaru said it wasn't time yet. She had wanted him to slay monsters, and for that, he would need a proper weapon. Leela agreed, but pointed out that finding one as conveniently as the kimono would be unlikely. Rokaru replied that if they couldn't find one, they would simply make one. Liella asked if he meant forging it, and he nodded. Soon they arrived at a blacksmith's workshop. Rokaru observed that weapons usually bore the name of their maker, allowing one to know their origin. Pointing ahead, he said that this was it, the place where weapons were born. Rokaru stepped into the smithy and announced that they had arrived. A young woman working there glanced up without looking directly at them and asked if they were already back, adding that if it was about money, she had some. Rokaru moved closer and, to his surprise, realized she was small, a child. Liella tugged his ear and corrected him, saying she was not a child, but a dwarf. Rokaru asked what a dwarf was, and Liella explained that though diminutive, dwarves possessed unmatched dexterity and were peerless craftsmen. Liella introduced them properly and explained that they had come to commission a weapon. The dwarf, who called herself Pinya, welcomed them and accepted their request. Rokaru inspected her work with an appraising eye and praised the balance, edge geometry, and overall craftsmanship, complimenting Pinya on the evident passion behind her forge. When she asked what kind of blade he wanted, he requested, if possible, a single-edged curved sword. Before Pinya could reply, two rough men began pounding on the door. They forced their way inside, shoving past Leela and insulting her. One of them crudely demanded that she move and accused Pinya of owing a debt. Pinya defended herself, insisting she had repaid what she owed and would not pay illegal interest. When one of the intruders reached for her, Rokaru intercepted, seized the man, and threw him to the floor, scolding the pair for their ill manners. The two aggressors, enraged, threatened Rokaru and prepared to fight. Rokaru tried to avoid trouble, reminding Liella they had been told to stay out of fights, but Liella urged him to teach them a lesson in the name of self-defense, and joked that the goddess would forgive him. The men declared that leaving them half dead would be impossible, and lunged at Rokaru. He met them with mere single-handed strikes. One went down unconscious, while the other, recovering, drew a knife. Rokaru incapacitated him with a precise kick to the groin, then explained matter-of-factly that striking certain vital points could kill with enough force, while a light blow would merely render a person useless. He added that, though he could capture an enemy general without killing him, he was also an expert at killing. When someone suggested hanging them, Rokaru left the decision unspoken. Liella insisted they set an example for bothering Pinya, but declined lethal vengeance. She healed the two aggressors enough to send them on their way, and warned them that if they threatened Pinya again, they would not leave with mere bruises. Terrified, the men fled. Pinya admitted she did not know who they were, but hoped the lesson had been learned. She confessed she had never seen anyone make those men run before. Grateful, she pledged to forge the finest single-edged curved sword for them, swearing on her pride as Pinya, the blacksmith. The scene then shifted to the two men returning to their boss. They reported that they had been interrupted by a stranger duo and that they had fled. Their superior, Bruno Giordani, scolded them for running away and called them a disgrace to the Giordani family. Angry at their failure and tired of excuses, he decided to handle the matter himself. The next morning was time for training. Leela grew weary and sank down, saying she needed to rest, and Rokaru teased her for being sluggish over what he considered only light exercise. Leela thought anyone would be tired after swinging a staff for hours from dawn, and Rokaru asked Pinya about the men from the previous day. Pinya dismissed them as nothing more than thugs who called themselves the Giordani family, then handed Rokaru a list of materials she needed to forge his katana and told him to gather them. They then made their way to the Adventurers Guild, where the receptionist Giselle greeted them and guided them inside. Leela cheerfully asked Giselle to register Rokaru as an adventurer, and Giselle agreed to begin the process. When Rokaru heard the word dungeon, his interest spiked. He thought of nothing but a den of monsters and was eager to enter. Giselle, however, explained that newly registered adventurers could not enter dungeons immediately. They first had to pass promotion exams from wooden to iron rank. Rokaru and Leela exchanged baffled looks when Giselle mentioned ranks and tests, and Rokaru grumbled at the added complication. Giselle then offered to introduce them to an iron rank party that was recruiting members, saying she could vouch for them. Following that lead, they set out for the forest where the party was supposed to meet them. Leela grumbled that the receptionist's recruiting seemed to mean nothing more than finding porters, and accused Giselle, half in jest, of being jealous of her beauty. Rokaru mused that Leela was quite the complainer, and they carried on to the rendezvous. The party waiting for them consisted of 3 members: Mika, a girl, and 2 young men named Joe and Lam. Joe thanked them for coming at short notice and offered to guide them to the dungeon entrance on the outskirts of the royal capital forest. He boasted of having explored dozens of dungeons and suggested Rokaru and Leela could learn from their experience. Leela asked for a brief rest, and as she fumbled and dropped her water bottle, a few nearby adventurers sneered. They derided the newcomers as countryside fools and parasites who dreamed of dungeons while lacking skill. Joe and Lem bristled at the taunts. Mika, indignant, vowed they would prove themselves. Leela, furious at the insults, urged Rokaru to teach the hecklers a lesson, though Rokaru remarked wryly that their goal seemed to have shifted from treasure to beating up rivals. They moved on toward the dungeon. Rokaru listened as the others described it, an ancient den of countless monsters with a core that continuously spawned foes, and a place where strange, valuable items often turned up. So valuable some suspected a link to another dimension. For many, the dungeon was a stage for glory or profit. Each adventurer delved deeper with their own motives. Mika urged everyone to forget talk and focus on treasure hunting. Laughter and bravado filled the group, and as if on cue, monsters appeared at the dungeon mouth, an opportunity to demonstrate how to handle what lay within. There were 2 goblins ahead. Gio warned that it would be troublesome if they managed to call for reinforcements, and Mika replied confidently before chanting her spell, Inhibition Magic. Silence. Instantly, both goblins were struck dumb, unable to alert others. Gio and Lame advanced to engage, and as the goblins charged, Lame drew his bow and released an arrow with perfect timing, declaring that they would not escape his sight. His shot pierced one of the creatures, and Gio encouraged the team to keep the momentum going. Soon after, he noticed another wave approaching, horned rabbits charging from the front and large bats swooping down from above. Mika reacted swiftly, casting another spell, Inhibition Magic Ultrasound. The bats crashed to the ground disoriented, and Gio and Lem quickly finished them off. From the sidelines, Rokaru and Leela watched the coordinated battle unfold. Rokaru nodded, impressed, and remarked that the team's understanding of monster behavior and ecology allowed them to respond efficiently, a well-thought-out strategy, especially with the use of magic. After the fight, Gio instructed his teammates to strip the monster corpses for materials, then turned to Rokaru and asked if he wanted to try fighting next. He explained that this dungeon was a beginner to intermediate level 1, meaning the upper floors contained only weak monsters. The perfect opportunity for Rokaru to get some experience. Rokaru asked if Gio was sure, and Gio affirmed it. Mika, a little doubtful, asked Leela if Rokaru would be all right. Leela smiled and said confidently that he would be fine. Rokaru drew his sword and smirked, saying he would handle it in his own way. He stepped forward to face a pair of goblins that had appeared, and Jo muttered that Rokuro seemed overly confident. Mika worried aloud that since he couldn't use magic, things could go wrong if the monsters called for help. But before either could intervene, Rokuro dashed forward with incredible speed. In a single fluid motion, he decapitated both goblins. Then, as a group of bats dove toward him, he casually picked up a stone, flicked it into the air, and struck them down one after another with flawless precision. When the horned rabbits charged, he spun, drew his blade once more, and cut through them effortlessly. When the dust settled, silence filled the dungeon. Gio, Lame, and Mika stared in disbelief. Mika finally managed to ask what kind of movements those were. No beginner could fight like that. Gio muttered that it was impossible for someone newly registered to move with such deadly precision. Liela, smiling proudly, crossed her arms and said, "You've met my expectations once again, Rokuro." They spotted an iron construct behind Rokuro, and everyone's breath caught. Mika wondered aloud whether it could be an iron golem and why one would appear on an upper floor, since those constructs were usually found in the middle levels. The group immediately considered retreating, arguing that they should be at least bronze rank to stand a chance. Rokuro, however, stepped forward, unfazed and charged. The others shouted warnings that physical attacks were almost useless against iron golems, but Rokuro countered that almost was not the same as completely, and began striking the golem. To their astonishment, he targeted its joints and seams, slicing out sections of metal with brutal efficiency until the construct collapsed. When the dust settled, they gaped at the fallen machine and began counting the salvageable parts. With that much iron, they could fashion new armor and weapons, perhaps even prepare to challenge the area boss. Jo thanked Rokuro for fighting and for sharing the spoils, and Rokuro shrugged that he had gotten what he needed. Lila muttered that they might have sold the parts for coin, but when Jo proposed pushing deeper now that they had the strongest porter with them, everyone agreed. The deeper floors promised tougher foes and better rewards, and they were eager to press on. At the middle floor entrance, Jo announced that their luck was changing as they crossed into the true depths. Their optimism evaporated when they spotted a lone adventurer who had been overwhelmed. Jo called out for aid, and the group braced themselves. Suddenly, a huge monster leapt into the center of the chamber, and every head turned in disbelief. It looked enormous, but someone cried that it was a kobold, which seemed impossible given its size. Rokuro told them to stand back, claiming the creature as his prey. He said he would enjoy the fight at last. Rokuro stood facing the massive kobold, and Jo nervously asked if he was really going to fight it. Mika, surveying the beast, noticed its size and suspected it must be the middle floor area boss. A normal kobold could never reach such proportions. Leela, observing the creature's injured right eye, realized something, the same wound she had seen on one of the kobolds that attacked her on the way to the royal capital. She muttered that it couldn't be a coincidence. This was no ordinary kobold. Before anyone could react further, the kobold charged at Rokuro. Everyone gasped in shock, but Rokuro barked for them to get out of the way, insisting they would only hinder him. Jo reluctantly agreed and urged the group to retreat, while Liela advanced instead. Alarmed, the others called after her. She explained that they should evacuate the injured to a safe place while she stayed behind. Whatever happened here, she intended to see it through. Reluctantly, the others obeyed. Rokuro turned to her and teased that he thought she would be the first to run, to which Leela indignantly reminded him that she was still a goddess. Rokuro acknowledged her sense of justice, but reiterated firmly that the kobold was his prey. He dashed toward the beast, telling Leela to watch from a safe distance. The kobold roared, lunging at him with tremendous force. Rokuro countered with his sword, but the impact sent him crashing to the ground. He noticed his blade beginning to show signs of damage and thought grimly that this was bad. Just as he recovered, Liela's magic flared, and suddenly Rokuro was repositioned directly in front of the kobold, a blur of speed that left even the goddess impressed. She noted that while his attacks seemed ineffective, his agility was unmatched. Liela then noticed Rokuro subtly signaling toward the injured adventurer still on the floor. She realized he was orchestrating the battle so they could safely rescue the man. Yet, she quickly concluded that wasn't entirely true. Rokurou simply wanted to enjoy the fight while keeping obstacles out of the way. The kobold, frustrated, began smashing pillars as Rokurou dodged around them with calculated precision. He noted aloud that the beast was using the pillars as part of its attack, and muttered wryly that it could use its head a little more effectively. The duel between human skill and monstrous strength had begun in earnest, and Rokurou's mind raced with tactics, even as the pillars trembled around them. During the intense fight, Rokurou suddenly drove his sword into the kobold's stomach and remarked that poor visibility favored the smaller combatant and that the monster simply wasn't clever enough. With that strike, the massive kobold seemed poised to be knocked out. Meanwhile, Leela attended to the injured adventurer, healing him and telling him he was lucky to be alive. The adventurer, however, protested, claiming it wasn't luck at all. The kobold's strength and speed were on an entirely different level, and he feared they were all doomed. Suddenly, Rokurou fell from a height, and Liela's eyes widened as she shouted his name. Rokurou, recovering, commented on how strange it was that the creature showed no pain even after having its insides gouged out, noting that it defied the natural laws of living beings. Liela agreed grimly, confirming that such was the nature of kobolds. Rokurou realized it was the same one he had killed before, though its revival didn't bother him. If it returned, he would simply kill it again. He mused that the strong devour the weak, a universal law in every age, and charged once more. This time, his sword shattered against the kobold's tough hide. Leela gasped, worried about the broken weapon. The monster grabbed Rokurou by the neck and slammed him to the ground. Leela muttered in frustration, admitting she wasn't skilled at offensive magic. But Rokurou rose, now more aggressive, powerful, and dangerous than ever. He warned Liela not to get in his way, admitting that he had hesitated earlier to preserve the borrowed sword, but now he could fight freely. Without any weapon, Rokurou charged, striking the kobold with his bare hands. He smashed its joints with brutal precision, shocking Liela. He grabbed its ear, slammed its head against his own shoulder, and scolded it like a teacher punishing a reckless student. "You pitiful dog," he said. "Fighting is painful, even more so with bare hands. But it is that pain which reminds us of our fear of death, our thirst for life. That is why we fight. If this is neither death nor life, nor even pain, then for whom do we fight?" With that, Rokurou mounted the creature's shoulders and, with a final bone-crushing motion, snapped its neck with his bare hands, ending the battle decisively. After Rokurou snapped the kobold's neck, the creature collapsed to the ground, dead. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he told Liela that it had been quite the workout. Liela, still in awe, remarked that she couldn't believe he had defeated it with his bare hands. They both crouched beside the fallen beast, inspecting it carefully. Rokurou noticed something unusual and mentioned black mist. Liela peered closer, puzzled, and observed that the kobold's body had shrunk. She remarked that normally bodies didn't shrink upon death and admitted she had never heard of black mist before. Rokurou asked if there were any known cases of corpses reanimating in their world. Liela explained that while ghosts and skeletons existed as monsters, it was definitely not normal for kobolds to return to life and go berserk. Meanwhile, the adventurers waiting outside grew anxious and shouted to see what had happened. Rokurou and Liela emerged from the dungeon, and Rokurou carried the kobold's head. The assembled adventurers stared in fear and disbelief at the gruesome trophy. The scene then shifted to the blacksmith district, where Pinya was waiting. She assured them that with the amount of iron they had collected, forging the prototype would be no problem, and instructed them to return in a few days to pick it up. Rokurou nodded in acknowledgement, saying he looked forward to it. Liela bid Pinya goodbye, stretching and admitting she was exhausted and ready for a few days of rest. Rokurou suggested that it might be a good opportunity to explore the royal capital, but Liela politely declined, opting instead for a long bath and a report to the guild. She arranged to meet Rokurou at Pinya's workshop in 3 days, and he agreed. That evening, Rokurou was seen resting atop a tree while Liela enjoyed her bath, and Pinya worked diligently on the sword in her workshop. 2 days later, late at night, Liela sat by the inn's window when she noticed smoke and fire in the distance. Alarmed, she realized the fire was coming from the blacksmith district and immediately rushed outside. People were fleeing the area, shouting in panic. Just then, Rokurou appeared and asked what was happening. Liella hurriedly explained that the blacksmith district was engulfed in flames. Without hesitation, Rokaru sprinted toward the burning district, with Liella close behind. When they arrived, their worst fears were confirmed. Pina's workshop and the surrounding area had been completely consumed by fire. Liella gasped, unable to believe the devastation before them.